So hello everyone. I hope you guys are having a fantastic day today and happy 2025. I hope you guys had a fantastic holiday season and New Year's. But yeah, let's get into the video. So, back when I did the 4090 video, which by the way, thank you guys so much for the support and viewership on that video. I pinned a comment that I found pretty hilarious about getting a MacBook for gaming. And while obviously they probably said that as a joke, I thought it would be a very interesting idea to actually explore more in depth on what current gaming Macs have to offer, especially with big games such as Cyberpunk 2077 coming soon onto the platform or recently released titles like Resident Evil 2. What is it actually like playing on a Mac? Let's get into it. First, let's talk native modern Apple Silicon games. Now, I don't have the most up-to-date or most powerful Mac ever. This is one of the base M1 Pro configuration MacBook Pros with the full-fat chip but only 16 gigs of RAM, which is shared between the CPU and GPU, so not a lot there. With that being said though, native Apple Silicon written games such as No Man's Sky and Resident Evil 4 run amazingly well. Especially now with the new game mode introduced in the recent Mac update, I'm getting for the most part a stable 60 FPS in these games on relatively modest and even higher settings. That is rather impressive, especially given that they can handle this performance even on battery. Now, obviously, these performance metrics are nothing that impressive, especially when you can get more capable gaming laptops. But I think the big thing here is being able to give a good enough performance while consuming substantially less power. So normal Apple Silicon native games were great, but what about those older legacy Mac games that ran on older Intel chips? This was my first big disappointment with the platform. As it turns out, a lot of my older games that would work on macOS before no longer do so because Apple just decided to ditch 32-bit support entirely a couple of years ago, and surprise, a lot of these older titles were only written in 32-bit. That is a major disappointment in my opinion because one of the strongest parts and pros of owning a PC is the legacy compatibility to play mostly any game on the platform. Okay then, that restricts my library to really only two games that I could feasibly test. Black Ops 3 and Borderlands 3. Let's first talk about Black Ops 3. At max settings, I was able to comfortably hit above 100 FPS a lot of the time, which for an older game is acceptable, but for a machine that's running solely on power is still very impressive to me. Now, Borderlands 3 wasn't as flawless as Black Ops 3. In fact, it probably was the most difficult game to run out of the entire suite that I tested. But going through with it, tinkering the settings around 1080 to 1200p, at medium settings at 75% resolution, I was only able to get around like 45 to 50 FPS in the really dense and combat related areas. I could hit 60 plus, but that was only in very open and empty areas where not a lot was going on. So yeah, surprisingly, this game was the one that I had the most trouble with getting to work properly. Like I ran into so many issues with crashing and just like visual glitches and hiccups, which was kind of surprising. In conclusion, with the exception of Borderlands 3 for the most part, all of these games that were made for the Mac, whether it's on Intel or Apple Silicon, do run rather fine for the most part. In fact, the Apple Silicon ones specifically run absolutely beautifully, and when games are optimized for their hardware, it's honestly a miracle of how well these games run under battery. Next, I want to try out gaming via applications like Crossover. Now, if you guys don't know what Crossover is, or applications like Parallels, these types of programs basically let you run a lot of Windows only games and applications on the Mac via technologies like D3 Metal and Apple's official game porting toolkit, or with Parallels case, virtualization via VMs. Now, because this is not native to macOS like these applications, you may need to go through some hoops and hassles for them to actually be playable and work well with the translation layers or VMs. In a lot of cases, like popular multiplayer titles like Call of Duty, it straight up will not work because the anti-cheats do not support these applications. But even then I've experienced other frustrations. For example, I experienced so many issues with my controller not being able to properly be recognized in these games through crossover, and it took almost like an hour and a half for me to troubleshoot that, and that just gave me a massive headache. But once I got the issues sorted out, The games that I did test ran rather well, though with some caveats. Shadow Generations and Ready or Not, for example, did run into a lot of stutters at initial boot up and like loading in of levels initially, but once everything loaded in, the games ran almost flawlessly at around 1080p between medium to high settings. For a game like Power World, testing at the very low preset at 1080p, I was able to hit around 40 to 50 FPS without much issue, which for an Unreal Engine 5 game is acceptable given the hardware and all this workarounds. The next game I tested, Monster Hunter Rise, ran almost flawlessly at medium to high settings. Unfortunately, I could not get any Steam overlay or anything like the metal HUD to display properly for the FPS, but from playing it myself, I could definitely tell that it ran at least a stable 60 FPS. If I could get my controller going for this game, I could easily find myself completely finishing the game on the Mac. So, after testing and playing some of my library on the Mac, I've got to say that I am very impressed with what modern Macs have to offer. Even with older or lower spec Apple Silicon like the M1s are, like in this MacBook Pro, this hardware definitely has the potential to be a very capable platform for gaming. And if you are willing to go through some of the hoops currently, I can definitely see someone using a Mac exclusively to play a set number of games. But that's also its biggest problem, that limited set. With still a lack of games being ported to macOS yearly, you basically are restricted on what other games you can play based on community-made applications and virtual machines. And unlike other translation or compatibility layers like Proton on the Steam Deck, these applications don't have the big back support of big teams like Valve to get a substantial number of games working properly super quickly. It's going to be a while before we get a super robust library that natively supports the Mac platform. And at this point in time, I legitimately cannot think of a good or valid reason to restrict yourself with that limited library, unless you know you will be only playing the current games that support macOS. I feel like this is a pretty obvious conclusion given the current perception of Macs by the majority of gamers, but I think Apple has a really solid blueprint here, and if they really want to take gaming seriously and turn the Mac into something much more than just a laughing stock, then I think they have the foundation here, but it's just going to be up to them and if they really care to actually continue this development of gaming on the platform. I'm going to end it here. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, make sure to leave a like and I'll talk to you guys in the next one. Later.